This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello and welcome back once again to North Pod. The preseason is over. Well, the preseason matches are over. We've still got another weekend of no North Melbourne football to get through before round one for us, but the preseason games are done. And okay, like not the best result against the Eagles. Definitely would have preferred the win, but I think some more promising signs in some aspects, definitely some negative signs in some others. Yeah, 2-point loss in WA. Injury-free is a big win, or as far as I can tell to this point, so that's definitely a success. Some pretty ugly defending and turnovers, but we had more of the play. We'll talk much more about it as the podcast goes on, but I think holistically speaking, that the feeling coming away from that game was... definitely dominated for periods, weren't able to kick accurately, but there was also some pretty glaring errors that, have plagued us for the past 4 or 5 years and just don't look as though we're finished with them just yet. So, look, plenty to talk about it. Let's jump right in. Time for Roo Review. This is where we go through the game, talk about team selection, how the game went overall, and I guess a big overview of the match. We didn't make too many changes to the side that played Melbourne the previous week. Jai Simpkin's still missing this time with the virus, I believe, so unfortunately we haven't gotten to see him play in North Melbourne colours during the preseason, but at least we know he did play the Indigenous game, so he's got some miles in his legs. Luke Parker sat this one out, but besides that, it was more or less the same side that we saw play Melbourne. Miller Bergman came in and played the last quarter or so, who we hadn't seen yet. Toby Pink didn't play. Riley Hardiman was, I guess, an emergency, but he didn't end up playing. Taylor Goh didn't play any minutes. But that aside, I mean, yeah, it was basically the same side. We saw much more of Dylan Stephens, I guess. He played, I think, the full game, or maybe he was the one that came off in the last quarter potentially for Miller Bergman. But yeah, not a drastically different side from what we saw, which I guess again speaks to the fact that what we've seen is more or less what Clarko's thinking is the best 23. I'm sure there'll be a change here or there, but the last 2 games, he's definitely put a priority on let's put who we think are the best, 25-odd players out there and see what they've got. So, not great that we haven't won either of the games, but I think at least we can kind of see the direction we're heading, and he's given a few of these players an opportunity to try and prove themselves. Like I said, a 2-point loss. So the final score was West Coast 11-5-71, North Melbourne 9-15-69. As you can see from that, 24 scoring shots to 16. We definitely dominated big periods of the game, but just were not able to capitalise. And that was no more evident than in the first quarter. There was a fairly substantial wind going our direction in the first and third quarters. And yeah, we dominated the first quarter. Absolutely. Had all of the play, just weren't able to put the score on the board, unfortunately, with our kicking accuracy on goal. Jack Darling was everywhere, but kicked 3 points, I think, in the first quarter, certainly 2. Yeah, at quarter time, we went up 1 goal to 3 goals, 6-24. So you can see if that's 6 goals, 3, it's virtually game over at that point. Unfortunately, look, it was a tricky wind. It wasn't just going straight down the ground. It was kind of heading towards a pocket. And so you could see, even though the wind was going in the direction of one end, it wasn't necessarily easy to kick goals from that end, as you can see from our 3 goals, 6. But it was all over the ground that we were on top in that first quarter. Dominated clearances, inside 50s were 15-1 at one point. It was, we were absolutely the best side. Our midfield was on top, and I thought, by and large, minus a couple of incidents, I thought the way that we were moving the ball was quite positive. We weren't bombing it long all the time, but there definitely were some times where we were bombing it. That being said, I mean, when you've got a wind that substantial, sometimes you just want to take advantage of that and go as long as you can, get the meterage and then figure it out from there. So, look, there's a couple of ways to look at it, but I thought in the first quarter, the signs were looking really positive. Second quarter began and the Eagles immediately hit the scoreboard with the wind and made us look silly, really. They managed to kick 5 goals straight in that quarter, but it was the start of the second quarter where they did the majority of that damage, really piled on a few. Poor old Aiden Core really couldn't compete with Waterman with the ball coming in so deep and so fast. Look, it wasn't all our fault. I think it's fair to say it's pre-season for the umpires too, and there were a few bizarre decisions or non-decisions. An example of that, Will Phil, I thought, laid a tackle beautifully on Bailey Williams. He'd had prior, he dispossessed the ball, and for whatever reason that was called play on. I'm not too sure why. I guess sometimes those ones, if the ball's kind of knocked out in the tackle, the umpires will call play on. But for me, in that instance, I think it should be holding the ball, and it looked holding the ball to me. West Coast went on to score a goal from that. So there was a few decisions like that where, if it's in the season, you'd be a lot more frustrated by it because it's pre-season. You go, all right, whatever, we'll take the positives from that play because it was a good tackle and should have been our ball at half back. It was just a bit of a tussle in the second half after that. West Coast got themselves back into it in the second, got themselves on top. I think they were in front at half time. And then, tussle in the second half. The wind still played a major role, so we went into three-quarter time with a 2-goal lead. Unfortunately, that just wasn't quite enough. Ended up, like I said, going down by 2 points. The fact that the lead was at three-quarter time was 12 points, but it was literally 12 points. We'd had 12 more scoring shots to that point. I think speaks to, just how wasteful we were in that first half, and even the third quarter we were wasteful. The last quarter we were actually relatively accurate when we were trying to keep ourselves in the game. Kicked 2 goals, 1 in the last quarter when it mattered, so to speak. West Coast unfortunately kicked 4 goals, 3. Again, had the win in that quarter and just got themselves in front by a little bit too much. Jack Darling kicked a late goal and gave us, an opportunity with about 90 seconds left, but we weren't able to get it forward and put real pressure on the Eagles, unfortunately. So, like I said, a 2-point loss. I think it was positive that we were able to see some experimenting and some scenario training late in the game. I think that's the positive of having, a preseason game that's this close. You do get to practice some of those things that hopefully you've been working on in the preseason. For example, with the game on the line, we're 1 point down and it's 90 seconds to go. We had an opportunity to try and execute. We weren't able to, and that's okay. But it's something that hopefully you're able to look at in the review and talk about. All right, well, were there opportunities in that last 90 seconds for us to do something different? For example, West Coast ended up kicking a point, and we had a kick out with maybe, 15, 20 seconds. You had to go down the middle. You had to know that's how long was left, but we opted for this. We took a few seconds off with running it out, and then we didn't kick long after that. We gave ourselves zero chance. Look, to be fair, we were virtually zero chance anyway because the wind was against us and we had, 15, 20 seconds to go full ground. But you just never know, but we gave ourselves no chance. So there's these kinds of things that I think hopefully you can, we can take out of the game. Much more competitive than last week against Melbourne, so that's a plus. And, I don't think West Coast were missing too many from their best 23 or so. Certainly a couple. They've got some injuries. Elliot Yeo, for example, is going to be missing. Oscar Allen, we know, is going to be missing. So they weren't at full strength, and neither are we. George Wardlaw obviously is missing for us, and Luke Parker didn't play. But I think it was more, whereas when we played Melbourne last week and they were missing, almost half a side worth of first choice players, I think we were more on par with what West Coast, put on the park. So, look, holistically speaking, disappointing not to get the win, but I definitely think there were some positive signs. But we'll talk more about that as we get to Story of the game. This is the big moment or the big element that decided the game, and I guess I alluded to it just before. Accuracy in front of goal, accuracy kicking for goal was the reason we lost this game. Conditions are tough, so you can understand that. It's not easy, but 9 goals, 15. West Coast were playing in the same conditions, and they were able to kick 11 goals, 5. That sometimes football is a simple game in that you can see that we played the better football throughout most of the game. We were on top around a stoppage, although West Coast certainly evened that up as the game went on. But we certainly had the better play, I would say, and looked better for more of the game. But Jack Darling kicked 1 goal, 3. Larky kicked 1 goal, 2. Curtis 2 goals, 2. And there were lots of players that kicked a point. It's not that there was one glaring player. It was just that we weren't quite able to adapt to the conditions. I think it's as simple as we kick straight, we win this game. I mean, one of those points that we kick, in theory, you can never quite say this because if something changes earlier on in the game, it changes the rest of the game. But one of those points becomes a goal and we win. So Jack Darling had a lot of opportunities earlier on. If he was able just to snag one of them, like one of those hit the post, it was pretty unlucky. So, yeah, I think from that perspective, it's pretty simple. If we finish our work, we win the game, and that's quite an easy thing to isolate. I think the other thing worth considering, though, is I think one of the major reasons that West Coast were able to kick more accurately was the chances that they created were actually, I think a lot better than ours. They were in the corridor. They were taking marks or taking shots from more or less directly in front. They did kick 1 or 2 really nice goals from harder spots, but for the most part, they were creating chances that were better, and that was because yet again we gave up some horrible turnovers, and our transition defense was just awful. So that allowed West Coast, once they got the ball, some really, really easy and clean opportunities to score. We've seen this time and time again. It was pretty evident early in that second quarter and parts of that last quarter as well, where we just turn it over in awful places. And even if we do turn it over at half forward, which in theory you should be able to defend, we just weren't able to. The West Coast would just take the ball the whole way, a couple of hand passes, break a tackle, and they've got, they're hitting up Jake Waterman inside 50 on the lead, which makes it impossible for Aiden Core to do anything. It's really hard to knock him on that, because if Waterman's leading up to an acre of space, there's not really any defender in the competition that can manage that. So look, I guess they're the two things that worked in tandem. The fact that the Eagles were able to get these opportunities was as a direct result of us just butchering the football and not defending well enough. Some examples: Charlie Comben missed a centering ball from the back pocket that was just unnecessary. There was no need for him to bite that kick off, and this has been a consistent theme for him. I don't know why he chooses to bite these kicks off that he's just not up to at the moment. If he needs to kick long, or get it into the hands of someone like Finn O'Sullivan or Caleb Daniel, who we know can hit a target. So that led to a goal for West Coast. Archer took an absolutely beautiful intercept mark on half back and then bit off a speculative kick in board that was intercepted. That one I don't think in the end did end up in a goal, but again, it makes it really hard for your defenders or for the rest of your team when you're kicking it like that. Even Nick Larkey, who we were on the counter attack, he had the ball sort of in the middle of the ground or just forward of the centre circle, just shanked a kick on the break that absolutely hit an eagle when he had 2 north options either side. And again, that went up the other end. I think Liam Ryan kicked a goal directly from that. And it's just, this has been the case for us for the past 5 years. The ball just finds its way up the guts far too often for our opposition and makes it really easy for them to score and also score fast. I think that was the thing about the second quarter. We went in with a bit of a lead, and that lead just evaporated because the Eagles were able to kick fast goals again, because we just weren't able to defend the whole ground, or we were giving up the ball in really, really dangerous spots. So I think that's my biggest concern. Look, clangers are going to happen, but the defensive setup right now is just not it. We're not able to slow the opposition down often enough. We saw a couple of examples. I can think of one where Finn O'Sullivan saved us with a really nice tackle at half back, but by and large, it's mostly us leaking goals because of our own fault. To be honest, it's not the opposition doing amazing things. It's us allowing them to do that. So that's probably the biggest concern for me coming out of this game. But it's a preseason game, just like last week. You want to take everything with a grain of salt. But I think this game was definitely played at a faster pace, a bigger intensity than last week. There were some big physical hits. Players were going in pretty hard. So I think we can take more of this game for what it was and probably take more concrete learnings from this game than we could from last game. It's time for Shinboner of the Week and the North Podium votes. Like last week, this is just, it's not counting towards anything. We'll start it with round one. So again, bit of practice for me, get my eye in. I think for me, the Shinbone of the Week is an easy one. It's Finn O'Sullivan. He has to play round one. This was the game where he absolutely convinced me of that. I was pretty sure, based on what I'd seen the first couple of weeks, that he'd be ready, and he was ready. But the game that he played against the Eagles was a real, not quite Harry Sheezel, but close from that first season. Could have picked several highlights, but he's ready to go. He led the game for intercept possessions, had 9 of those. Many of them were marks. He had 8 marks in total. He just looked so assured several times running back with the flight. He's got that uncanny ability to read it, to know where his body is in relation to others around him, and make the right call. I don't think any of those were ones where he ran back with the flight and was putting himself in serious danger and that kind of silly running back with the flight. He just read it really well, intercepted, played sort of a combination halfback and wing. Definitely the best I've seen him play of these three games of exposed form, but super, super exciting. I think we kind of saw what he could be for us in 2025. Based on this game. I think we know long-term he's probably going to end up in the midfield. We don't really have a spot for him there right now, and that's okay. But I think we saw him playing a little bit off half-back and certainly on the wing. He can absolutely find himself in the right spot. Like I said, he laid a big tackle that saved what would have been a fast break for West Coast as well. He's not afraid of that physical contact. Had a couple of good, really nice kicks. There was one where he took the mark at half forward, could have rushed, gone short to a player in the pocket, but kicked long over the top and hit Nick Larkey, who had a mismatch essentially in the goal square. So that's that kind of assuredness, and he wasn't rushed at all. I think that's what we see with these really high draft picks is they just look like they've got more time than other players. They're not rushed with their decision making, and we saw that from him. He was also hit. He made a really nice run through the middle of the ground, and Harry Sheezel hit him absolutely beautifully, and I think he maybe took a bounce after that, but he certainly continued the run and then had a shot on goal that just missed to the left. But I think we saw so many things that Finn O'Sullivan could be for North Melbourne in 2025. So he's Shinboner of the Week. I thought his game was super impressive and definitely looking forward to watching him play in round one. I'm certain now that he will be playing round one. I was pretty sure, but I'm certain now. So if he is our Shinboner of the Week, let's have a look at the North Podium voting, or what it would have been if this was a real game. A reminder, this is the general gist. Players can get, or as many players as I want can get votes, but it's 4 votes for a game-winning elite performance without any major faults, 3 for a great game, 2 for a good game, and then 1 if you've played your role or you had a couple of big moments. That's kind of the gist, and I'm setting a fairly high bar for good and great game. It's not, accumulated plenty of the ball, and that's about it. So I didn't think anyone was worth the 4 in this game. I think it's going to be pretty hard to get the 4 votes if we don't win the game. But I think pretty easy to give Harry Sheezel 3 votes from this game, and he was our best on the field pretty comfortably, I would say. 36 disposals, a goal, 6 marks, 7 clearances, 6 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, which was the most on the ground, went at 89% disposal effectiveness, and just put his team on his back in that third quarter when we'd had a real slump in the second. We needed something. I just mentioned before, he hit Finn O'Sullivan with an absolutely filthy inboard 45-metre kick that Finn O'Sullivan was able to just mark in stride, didn't miss a beat. Shortly after that, Shees kicks a goal from 50 metres on the run. If we hadn't seen it all before, you wouldn't believe it. It was just an absolute masterclass from the Shees. He really did everything that he could to get us across the line, playing mostly midfield, a stint or two forward, but for the most part, he was in the midfield there. And as you can see, 36 disposals, highest possession getter on the ground, and just did a bit of everything as he likes to do, Shees. So I think he's going to launch into being a really good midfielder for us this year. We know he started last year still off half-back. I think he is going to be more or less a full-time midfielder with some rests forward this year from the looks of it. And I think that's super exciting for us. If he can get anything close to this kind of output in the real games, we'll be having a lovely time. 2 votes I've given to 2 players, Finn O'Sullivan and Tristan Sherry, for 2 votes. So FOS I mentioned earlier, I don't really need to say much more about him. 18 disposals, 8 marks, a goal assist, 4 inside 50s, 9 intercepts. And like I said, showed the player that he can be. So I think I can move on to Tristan Sherry, who I thought it was touch and go if I gave him 2 or 1. But I think the fact that he really dominated and bullied Flynn around the ground, he had to get the 2 votes. 16 disposals, 2 marks, 1 of those contested. 14 tackles, so back to that physical best that we saw him doing last year. 5 clearances, 34 hit-outs, a goal assist, 7 score involvements. Just a far better outing than last week, albeit he's playing a less experienced opposition ruckman. He was playing Tom Campbell last year, who is a journeyman, a solid journeyman. Flynn's one that is an up-and-comer as a ruck. He's been around a while, but is not someone that's been able to put himself as a first choice ruckman. So I think the fact that he was able to more or less win the ruck around the ground, like I said, clearances, tackles are the things that we know we're going to get from Tristan. Would have liked him to tidy up his disposal a little bit, maybe take a couple more marks around the ground, but I think the fact that he competed in the air around the ground, he was beaten at one point. Flynn took a mark inside 50 that Sherry was just a little bit out of position on, but that was a fairly large pack in one of those ones where you're not necessarily certain where the ball's going to fall. So, look, a good game from Tristan Sherry. Not great, but a good game. And I think, like I said, more promising than we saw from him last week. So I think he's going to be really ready to go for round 1 and able to make a big impact in that game, I hope. And then I had several 1 voters. Tom Powell was a 1 voter. I think after Shees, he was our most consistent mid, 25 touches, a goal, 5 tackles. And I think he's ready to launch similar to Shees into a year where he spends most of his time in the midfield and does some damage. He looked solid, had some good moments, but like I said, 1 vote. He wasn't an amazing game, but I think he played his role. Caleb Daniel, pretty similar to last week. I think this is going to be a standard day for him. Had 26 disposals, a big tackle to save us later on in the game, nearly 400 metres gained. I really liked his game, and I liked the fact that he wasn't just a distributor. He was having an impact defensively as well. I think he's going to have to do that in order for our back line to work. We know that we've got some deficiencies down there, so he can't just be a distributor. He does need to, be useful as a defender, and I think he was. Jack Darling is one that he was big in the first quarter, big in the last. Probably not as much happening in the middle part of the game. 1 goal, 3. He kicked 15 disposals, 9 marks, which is super, super important for us. Was competitive in the ruck, and I think more importantly, he found his way into the hole when West Coast was trying to exit defensive 50. There was a few times where he got himself into that right spot as a ruckman. So I think as backup ruck, he's going to be, serviceable for us for the year. Hopefully he can have this kind of, if he has this kind of game and maybe kicks slightly straighter, we're in for a fantastic time. But a solid outing from Darling against his former opposition, or his former teammates rather. LDU, 23 touches, pretty much cruised, kicked an absolutely elite goal laid on, stepped about 4 players, kicked around his body with it for a beauty that, like I said, kept us in it. Probably was a little bit patchy as compared to someone like Harry Sheasel or Tom Powell was in and out of the game, but when he was there, he was pretty flashy. We know what he's like. Darcy Tucker is one that I was super impressed with. I thought similar to Caleb Daniel, he had some good drive off half-back, 20 disposals, 7 marks, went at 85%. Probably one of his more assured games for us. It wasn't one of those ones where he found himself in trouble all the time and under pressure. Most of the time he had some time and space to do something with it. So, yeah, I thought it was one of his better games that he's played for us, albeit it's a practice game. And then Paul Curtis is the last player to get a 1 vote. 2 goals, 8 disposals, 4 marks. This was definitely one of those games where, similar to Jack Darling, really, he was in and out of the game. He looked really dangerous. I just think needed to do it a little bit more often and with a little bit more consistency if I was going to push him up the vote. So just going back over that, Harry Sheasel, 3 votes, 2 votes to Finn O'Sullivan and to Sherry, and 1 vote, Powell, Daniel, Darling, LDU, Tucker, and Curtis. But, like I said, it counts for nothing. This is just practice. Next game, though, will be underway with the official North Podium voting for 2025. So even though the voting system has changed from last year, it's going to be the same philosophy. I'll give the players the votes, and then we'll go through what the standings are looking like at the end of the year, or we'll keep track of it as the year goes. Looking forward to it. What I'm hoping is that this system at least gives, the defenders and the players that maybe wouldn't, get an option to get a vote in the past because they're not in the best couple, at least acknowledgement, even if it's not. It's probably unlikely that we're going to have a different winner, but I think at least we'll have a bigger spread of players being acknowledged and maybe a better idea of, overall performance of certain players because, they're not being restricted by someone else being a slightly better player. So, yeah, looking forward to North Podium in 2025. Thank you so much for supporting the show and listening to North Pod. I really appreciate it. I'd really doubly appreciate it if you could share the show with any North Melbourne fans that you know. Give me a subscribe on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, any of your podcast services, and a review on those would go a long way. You can find me on social media, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, at North Pod Show or at North Pod. Really appreciate the support of everyone listening. If you would like to provide me some additional support, you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes, where you can, like I said, show your appreciation even more. But thank you to everyone who listens to the podcast. Let's get to Kanga Clipboard. Replacing positives and negatives from last year. This is just, here are the stray thoughts that we need to unpack a little bit further from the game. I think the major thing from me is our best and worst entering inside 50 or the difference between those is quite stark. At times we looked really, really good. There was a moment where Robert Hansen Jr. in the first quarter had a really nice, precise kick to Cam Zerha. Nick Larkey hit up Paul Curtis in the second quarter with lowering the eyes and finding him in the pocket. There are moments where I think the way that we move the ball inside 50, we've matured and we've progressed and we're on the right track. There are other moments where someone like Bailey Scott just bombs it in really high and slowly, and I just go, what hope are we giving our taller players to mark that football? So look, like I said, the difference between the best and the worst in that element is still really stark. I think we should be past just bombing it long, particularly early in the game. I think it's different when it's late in the game, the game's on the line, and there's congestion, there's flooding, and you've got no time. But typically, the game earlier on in the game, you've got opportunities to find targets, and we saw West Coast were able to do that. Maybe that's partly because our whole ground defence is so poor, but I think the fact that holistically we still have players that I just don't trust kicking inside 50. Like Bailey Scott is one. LDU is one that sometimes is known to butcher it going inside 50. Jai Simkin obviously hasn't been playing, but he's another that I don't necessarily trust with his kicking going inside 50 at the moment. So I think we've got to be really conscious of who is kicking it inside 50. I'd love to see more of Robert Hansen Jr. doing that because I've really liked what I've seen from him in these past couple of games. I'll talk about him in a minute. We know that someone like Harry Sheasel is a great kick. We saw that on display. Finn O'Sullivan, another that I think we really like the look of. Will Phillips, I'll continue to go on about it. I don't think it was his best kicking game, this one, but I still think that he's a really good short kick. So he's another that I'd like to see going inside a little more often. I hope that with playing at Marvel Stadiums, the conditions there comes with a bit more attention to precise ball delivery and hitting leads. I totally understand that playing at Bunbury, where there's a massive swirling wind, it's probably tempting just to go, I'm just going to get the meterage and hope for the best. I understand that, but look, we've seen that Jack Darling, he's going to present, and that's going to mean that there's space for Larkey and Zerha and Curtis to move into and hopefully provide, other options. So I think the fact that we've brought Darling across says that we do want to play a bit more of a precise game moving forward. I think he allows us to do that, but the midfielders and the halfbacks have to deliver on that, and they have to actually try to be precise and lower their eyes, because far too often we are still just kicking it long and hoping, and we know that we just don't have the forward line that's going to function efficiently that way. It's going to bounce straight back out, and our whole team defense is going to let us down. We've seen that time and time again. So look, hopefully we can move towards a bit more precision in the coming weeks, but I'd just like to see that gap closing. I'd like to see less of the bombing and more of that precise movement. I mentioned him before, but I think if I'm picking between Robert Hansen Jr. and Jacob Constanti, I'm starting with Hansen Jr. I know that they're different players. Hansen Jr. is going to stand out more. He's a flashier player. He gets more of the ball, but I just don't think. Constanti had 3 touches in this game, and he tried to tackle, he tried to corral, he put on some pressure. He was the one that created a contest which allowed LDU to crumb it and kick his goal late. So I don't think Constanti, he's a write-off by any means, but I think we can only play one of them. The fact that Simpkin and Parker both need to come back into this side, and they're both going to play some forward line time, I think means that we're going to have to pick to start off with between Hansen Jr. and Constanti. And I think Hansen just gives us more with the ball. Like I said, he's showed himself to be a good kick. He looks more likely and dangerous around goal. He still has that. He's got that quickness and that pace about him that our forward line does lack a little bit of. With someone like Parker coming in, we're going to get slower as a midfield. And I think the fact that Darling puts on such good pressure for someone who plays as a key does mean that, obviously you'd take Constanti if he was a goal threat. The challenge for me at the moment is he's playing quite similar to a Kane Turner role in the back half of his career, where he's a forward that doesn't kick goals. He puts pressure on, he tackles, but he's just not a goal threat at the moment. So I think I'd take Hansen Jr. I think we need more of that capacity to hit the scoreboard. He can still do some pressuring, although he's clearly not as physical as someone like Constanti. I can't see a scenario in which we're picking them both. So we've played them both for all of those preseason games. I think Constanti has shown a bit, but I think I'm going with Hansen Jr. as my first pick, because I think the combination of Simpkin and Parker is going to replace one of those, because more or less I see them as rotating through that half forward and midfield. Speaking of the midfield, I think the logjam in the middle part of the ground is going to be fascinating for round one. We saw in this game, Sheasel, Powell, LDU and Phillips were the midfielders that went through there. Cam Zerha had a couple of centre bounce attendances, but it was those 4 mids that did the rest of it. Obviously, Sherry doing the rucking. With Parker and Simpkin to come in round one, you'd hope. It's going to be interesting to see what that mix looks like, and we know that Georgie Wardlaw is on the sidelines ready to come in as well. There's going to be a squeeze there for sure. I think we're okay for round one. I don't think any of them are going to get pushed out for round one because, like I said, I think Parker and Simpkin essentially come back in as one more midfielder, and also they're going to spend a lot of time forward. But when Wardlaw comes back, it's clear to me that we probably can't play all of them unless Parker and or Simpkin are playing a full-time forward role, and I can't see that happening either. So there's definitely going to be a logjam there. I think Will Phillips is probably the one that at this stage is last in the pecking order, but he's playing so well with the opportunity that he's getting, it would be really hard to drop him. Just one to watch, I guess. when Wardlaw returns. I think we all knew that this was gonna happen when we traded for Luke Parker. There was a bit of a surely we don't need more midfielders. At that time, we were also looking at drafting Finn O'Sullivan, who again is a midfielder who's probably not going to spend a lot of time in the midfield this year. McKercher is someone that I think we'd like to see some midfield minutes, not just on the wing. So the logjam in there is fascinating. It's a great problem to have. I think you'd much prefer to have this kind of problem than what we've got in, say, our backline, where it's hard to figure out who the best handful are going to be because it's slim pickings back there, and particularly last season when you think about the pickings that we had to choose from back there. But yeah, I think it's a good problem to have, but one that I'm certainly watching with interest, because I don't want to see a situation in which the 4 that we pick on the bench are all midfield types. I think you can afford to have your 3 starting mids, and you can have 2 on the bench, or 1 up forward and 1 on the bench, but you don't want to be limiting your options around the ground because you're trying to fit so many midfielders into the team. I think that's a concern for me. But look, round 1, I think we'll be okay. It's when Wardlaw comes back, and I'm going to be really interested to see if Powell, Phillips, and Wardlaw can all play, because we know Sheasel and LDU are going to play. I think for sure Parker and Sim are going to play. So, Powell played every game last year. Wardlaw plays when he's fit. So that's where at this stage, it looks to me like Phillips is last in the pecking order, but the season is long, and there's plenty of water to go under the bridge as yet. Probably the last major talking point that I've got here, I think missing out on the win, it is a shame. It doesn't mean anything in reality. It's a preseason game, but I think the belief for a side lacking in it so much, it would have been a big boost for us ahead of round 1. We've got a pretty tough schedule. Pretty much any schedule for us is going to be tough. When you're at the bottom of the ladder, you can't play yourself. So unless we're playing West Coast or Richmond first up, I think you're not sure that you're going to be up for a win. I just think it would have been really nice to finish the game off, kick a goal or 2 late and finish on top and have that confidence going into the season that, we can actually finish a game off. We know last year there were so many games where we played super well but weren't able to finish our work, and in the second half we just got blown away or run over the top of. And this game, whilst it wasn't exactly the same, had similar vibes to it. We dominated patches. We weren't able to quite put it on the scoreboard, and then the opposition goes bang, bang, bang and makes it look a lot easier than we'd been finding it. So not exactly the same as 2024, but definitely some similarities. And I think, we deserved to win based on what we were doing around the ground. Our finishing up forward was disappointing for sure. And ultimately we weren't good enough, to be clear. I don't think we deserved to win the game holistically, but I think, there were definitely patches of the game that where we were the better team and were playing super confidently. So yeah, like I say, big picture, who cares? We're not going to be thinking about this, in a month's time, the fact that we lost. But I do think that, that feeling walking off after a win, it's different walking off after a loss. And I think so many of these players just have played in so few wins. I think it would have been really nice to, go into the season or start the season feeling a little bit more positively and a little bit more confidently, I guess. That being said, last season we had that really nice preseason win against Collingwood and, went on to lose every game for the first half of the year. So I don't know that it's going to make a big difference, but I think, every little win helps at this point. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get the win in this one, but ultimately, I think, looking at the result, we can feel, relatively optimistic and positive, I think, despite the result. Again, normally, it was the same as last week here, I'd go into the Around Arden Street news segment, but not a lot of news floating around in this preseason. Probably there'll be some more next week, given we've got the week off. There might be a little bit more happening, but nothing to report in the Around Arden Street segment this week, which brings us to next week. No game for the lads. Opening round will be on, so obviously, we won't be playing in that. We're a small club, so we will have the weekend off. I assume that there'll be some match simulation-ish stuff happening at training to keep conditioning up, but not an official practice match or anything as such. I think the podcast next week, I'll have a look at what my current best 23 / predicted round 1 side is looking like. Now that we've had the pre-season, I've got some exposed form, and I think we can have a chat about that and maybe what the long-term prospects of the side are looking like, sort of what I'm expecting to see or who I'm expecting to see this season. So I think that's what we'll go with round 1. Sorry, that's what we'll go with next week, and then after that, it's round 1. We're back to the real stuff. We're playing the Dogs at Marvel, so we'll chat a bit more about that next week, I guess. But definitely tune back in next weekend. There will be a podcast, even though there is no game for North Melbourne. I think that's all my thoughts. I think I want to reiterate, I'm not too sure, how the season's going to go. My feeling is still that we're going to be slow to start the year. That's what I think. I wish that I didn't think that, but I do think we're going to be slow to start. But I really have confidence that the second half of the year, we're gonna put some things together. We're gonna string some wins together, and we're going to be really optimistic going into 2026. But I know there's so many North fans out there that are wanting us to take a big leap this year. I'm just not seeing the leap this year. I'm seeing progress. I'm seeing some growth. I'm definitely seeing and hoping for some more wins. But I think the fact that, last year I think was where we were really at, all right, we have gotten rid of all of our old experienced players. Let's start building. And I think this is going to be the first year where we move up a little bit. I guess for me, I'm trying to set my expectations because, when you're on the bottom for so long, you just want the change and the improvement to happen right away. We've seen other sides like Hawthorn have that improvement right away. I think we're a year away from that kind of accelerated growth. So, look, we'll have a chat more about it next week in terms of what we can expect from the team. But I think for me, that's coming out of this preseason. We've lost to Melbourne, who were, half their AFL side. We've lost to West Coast, a team that I think we probably holistically should be better than. It's hard to, based on just those results, to be optimistic. But I think my medium term, expectations are quite positive. Anyway, that's all for my sermon. I just thought it was worth, I guess, touching base with how we're feeling. I'm a little bit disappointed with the preseason, but for the most part, it's what I've expected, and I think we've seen a bit from enough players that makes me feel relatively positive. The back line is a worry, but it's going to be a worry all year. I think it's not going away until we can get players like Will Dawson and Matt Whitlock really, big-bodied and developed in there. So that is going to do us for the podcast. Like I said, I'll be back next week. Have a fantastic week. Hope you're enjoying the autumn. We're out of summer. Thank goodness I can't do the hot weather. So enjoy this autumnal weather. And I will speak to you next week. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.